Good evening. I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome, everyone. Merry Christmas if you're celebrating that this week. I know we will have the recordings will be very busy um, the next couple of weeks because people's schedules and families. Um, I was just with a lot of people this weekend at State Line. So for the East Coasters, which I'm on the wrong side of the East Coast right now, I'm on the north side of the East Coast. So it's freezing. But for the East Coasters, I did get a lot of people from the Pacific and the Mountain Time asking to push us back to 9 o'clock instead of 8:30 so that they would be out of work. But I'm not saying that's going to happen. But if you were one of those people, just know that I heard you loud and clear. And that's it. We are on the exhibits. I want to quickly go to, well, we will open up with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm going to quickly go to Appendix M. That's where we're starting, Appendix M, quickly. That is the conference panels. And I know we just quickly went over this a little bit, but I'll just go over it again quick. It just is an alphabetical listing by state and province, if you're in Canada, of showing how many how many delegates are in each state. That's the first thing it shows. It shows the area numbers that are in that state. If you're somebody who digs down into this to the 100th detail, you'll notice alphabetically, the lower you are in the alphabet, or higher, if you consider A the highest, but then you have a lower number. It was just alphabetical. There were no numbers to start, so you should know that too. That didn't come out to the late 70s or 80s. There were no area numbers. And it's funny because area numbers still drive some old timers crazy. When people say they're from area number and don't say where, like it's a test, So I'll just throw that out as a suggestion. If you come from one of those areas where everybody says, regardless of the position, that they're a panel, whatever, or area, but some areas it's just the alternate delegate and delegate who throw that around. But either way, tell people where you're from. Especially you're going to probably be in a room where there are people from other areas or other states, and they don't know where Area 15 is or Area 72. So it's simple. I live in South Florida, Area 15. The other thing that it shows is area represented. So that first chart, like if you use BC Yukon, they have one delegate, but it represents British Columbia and Yukon, but one delegate. If you go down to California, you'll see a little parentheses there because it has 3, and then it says 6 in total, but you see that it divides them central, north, central, southern. That usually means that the other areas were created later on. So that's why they're lower in area number or higher, like Washington, the original Washington state, and then the new Washington state, or the original Los Angeles, which is Area 5, but then the new Los Angeles, Area 5, and Area 93. So that's what that first chart says. The second chart just is delegate elected for even years and then delegate elected for odd years. And I'm guessing most people here know, but for those who don't, and anybody listening, we have odd and even delegates. That means that were you an area that supplied a delegate the first year in 1951? Or did your first delegate go in 1952? First year delegates and second-year delegates. That's the only kind of delegates there are, except for wild exceptions, which we went into when we went through the service manual, but we don't need to get into here to confuse anybody. Delegates that were just elected this fall will be starting January 1st. Now, I just got off the phone with somebody today because there is a trend starting or started. So I'm just going to pass on what I passed on to somebody. I don't care if you're elected in September or elected in October or elected in November. Like somebody called me and they said, "What's my job now?" And I said, "To finish the job you have. It ends at midnight on December 31st. If you are the secretary and got elected treasurer, well, welcome to being treasurer on January the 1st of 2026. Don't give up on your secretary job until then. That's not what the area elected you for. They elected you for the full 365-day periods. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a transition and getting some information. But again, that's to prepare you to start on January 1st. Delegates elected this fall will start January 1st, 2026, meaning they will be a panel 76 delegate. So the first year delegates at this next conference in April of 2026 are panel 76 delegates. The second year delegates are panel 75 delegates. The conference is pretty equally split between half first year, half second year. There have been some areas I already talked about that have been added. Somebody asked me, why is California in here twice? My job is not to disagree with how this chart is put together, by the way. Just want to make that clear. People have all different thoughts about how it should be laid out for when we create a new area. If you go to Washington, it says, which is the last one listed, it says number of delegates, and then it says 1. Why is that if they have 2? Well, because the other delegate's an even year delegate. If you go to that next page and you go to the page after that, for the end of that chart, you see Washington, 1, 2 in total. Same with California. If you go to California, they have 3 even, 3 odd. So they're pretty well split. That's why it's listed like that, because it's divided between odd and even. There hasn't been a new delegate area created in almost 25 years now, 26 years. And before that, it was 1993 when Area 92 was created. What I will do is, I see there are some questions here already. Let's see. I'm going to throw out something to somebody. If you leave the meeting, that's fine. I could total respect. But don't send in nasty questions. I said we were starting on Appendix M. Depending on the service manual you have, if you have the new one, teal, it should be page 129. But for the person that felt like they needed to send a nasty message, we just don't do that here. That's another service manual workshop where you can say ugly things, but we don't do that here. Any other questions on the panel numbers? Because before we move to another exhibit, I just want to make sure we get any questions on the panel numbers. Most regions are evenly split, about half. Most conference committees have at least one delegate from each region on them. Obviously, if there are 93 delegates and some regions have 14 delegates, that's more than the conference committees we have. So some regions will have 2 people on a conference committee, but in the random algorithm that they use now, when they sort it through the computer, they do strive to make sure that each committee has at least 1 member of each region. Any other questions on panel numbers? Okay. The next exhibit is something that's near and dear to a lot of people's hearts because it creates lots of questions all the time. In the manual that I have in front of me, it's page 132. It is labeled as Exhibit N as in Nancy, and it is titled Trademarks, Logos, and Copyrights. We should probably start with the top of that because those terms get confused. We'll start with the easiest one, logo. It's exactly what it says. It's a logo. But just because it's a logo doesn't mean it's a trademark or a copyright. So we should all know that. The important things we're talking about here are trademarks and copyrights. Copyrights are for sections of literature or whole pieces of literature. Trademarks are for symbols or logos. It says in 1993, Alcoholics Anonymous World Services, Inc. announced that the official use of several circle and triangle trademarks and service marks were being discontinued. The following is a complete list of registered trademarks and service marks that symbolize Alcoholics Anonymous, its work, and its purpose. And here they are. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, the Big Book, the Blue People graphic, Grapevine Lavinia, the way it's written there, the Grapevine, AA Grapevine, GV, AA Grapevine Digital Archive, and Audio Grapevine. It says, additionally, the Blue People graphic is a copyrighted design and trademark of AAWS Inc., with all rights reserved for use exclusively by the AAWS Board, the AA Grapevine Board, the General Service Board of the United States and Canada, and the General Service Office of the United States and Canada. So I know that there's probably somebody who's here tonight or listening to this whose area or district or in a group has the Blue People logo. If you don't know what the Blue People logo is, please go to aa.org website and take a look at it. No permission is granted. It doesn't matter if you think you're the official area of some state. It is not granted permission for anybody to use. It is only for entities or corporations. General Service Board, Inc., AA World Services, Inc., Grapevine, Inc., GSO Office, AA Grapevine Office. And there is a legal purpose behind that. It's not just a rule for the sake of making a rule. About 10 years ago, 11 years ago, AA got dragged into a very nasty, nasty lawsuit that was the subject of many news shows. It involved a woman who unfortunately was murdered. The person who pled guilty to murdering her, she met at an AA meeting. Her parents, and I'm not saying this with any judgment, I'm just telling you the facts. Her parents did sue AAWS, the General Service Board, the local intergroup. Those were eventually dismissed by the court that was handling them. But one of the things we learned is that we need to show a difference between us and groups and districts and areas. We don't have franchises. That's why when you hear somebody say they're an official group, they're an official group of their group. That's what they're official of. There is no such thing as an official Alcoholics Anonymous group as far as being designated official by AA World Services or the General Service Board. If you have a number, that means you registered to receive communications because you said you're a group, not because anyone else said you were a group or gave you a good housekeeping seal of approval or certified you and went by and visited you and had like some checklist. We don't do any of that. But because we're not a franchise, we need to make sure that intergroups and districts and areas and even AA groups don't look like they're us. So every once in a while, somebody gets hopefully a phone call is made first, but then they will get a cease and desist letter to stop using the blue people. And it's not personal. It's not that the General Service Office or the board has any personal grudge against you. They're not saying you're not official. They're just saying you're not part of that legal structure. It goes on to say, as a general rule, no one has the authority to reproduce AA conference approved literature without prior written permission from AAWS. However, given the nature of our fellowship, our experience indicates that AA groups and entities, and only AA groups and entities, should have the authority to reproduce limited amounts of AA conference approved material. In no case should this material be amended or modified. And people ask, why do we copyright stuff? Well, if it's important that we keep our message, there's really only one way to do that in the world, in the United States, and that's to copyright it. And we've lost some copyrights in the past, and that's caused immense trouble over the years. It was in the 70s that the board or the office or both realized that we never renewed the copyright on the first and second edition of the Big Book. That was a big mistake. There's a whole official list now and a diary of copyrights, but that's why some people can go to the internet or other places and they can buy a first edition or a second edition Big Book because we don't have the copyright on it anymore. And same with the 12 and 12. Now, the fourth edition, we have the copyright on. When the fifth edition is printed, we have the copyright on. People ask this about the Plain Language Big Book. The Plain Language Big Book is a translation of a copyrighted fourth edition. So it is technically copyrighted. Other countries get a license to produce our literature. That's how that works. If they have a general service board, they can apply to get a license to reproduce our literature. But at the end of the day, we approve what they create. So we make sure that the translations match up with the 12 and 12 or with the first 164 of the Big Book. Many other countries attach their own stories so that it's a big book for their country or their language. Okay. When reprinting AA publications, the proper credit line should be included to ensure that the copyrights of AA literature are protected. After a quotation for a book or a pamphlet, the credit line should read reprinted from name of the publication and the page number with permission of Alcoholics Anonymous World Services, Inc. So for all you people out there who are on districts and intergroups and God knows whatever committees, if someone is quoting or putting a little piece of a AA conference approved copyrighted material in a newsletter or in a letter or a report to they should have this line in there that it's reprinted with the permission. And here is, always bad when we give general guidelines for alcoholics, right? It's like general rules or general whatever, but here it is. Permission to reproduce articles or other grapevine or Lavinia material, either in print or via electronic media, such as web pages, must be obtained from the AA Grapevine, Inc. Each article or item must be reprinted in its entirety and carry the following credit line. And then it shows you the example. So the Grapevine, it's different. You cannot reprint pieces of a Grapevine article. They only grant permission if you print or reproduce the whole Grapevine article. For people that don't know, if you submitted your story for the 5th edition of the Big Book, before your story would even be considered for the committee, you were sent a release that you no longer own it, that you have to sign, that you are turning over copyright to AA World Services. Same if you publish an article in the Grapevine. The Grapevine will send you a copyright letter so that you sign over permission, so that it is no longer you no longer own that. Logos and artwork. AA Grapevine Inc. does not grant permission to reproduce either its logo or its registered trademarks. And then it lists them all. Its artwork or any other cartoons or any other on any website or in any other publication. So the Grapevine is very clear about that. Its logos should not be anywhere. My experience, each corporation, AA World Services and AA Grapevine, has somebody who handles intellectual property. It's part of somebody's job. If you send in a request to get approval, they will get back to you rather quickly. At every AAWS and AA Grapevine board meeting, there is a part of the board agenda where the person who handles intellectual property either made a recommendation to grant permission or to not grant permission, and the reason why to grant it or the reason why not to grant it. So that is in every board meeting. The board deals with that. And I would say 99.9% of the time when I was there, the person whose job it is, the board approves what they decided to either approve it or not approve it. Every once in a while, there's a real technicality and there might be a discussion. The circle and triangle, probably the biggest myth is that we do not own the trademark. We do own the trademark. It's ours. Whatever basement of whatever office building in Washington, D.C., on whatever old microfilm or in the cloud now, we chose not to enforce that trademark anymore. And that decision had to be made because one of the defenses that people were using was that we selectively enforced it. And so that's why with the blue people, we enforce it against everybody. It turns out that if we enforce the circle and triangle trademark, we'd be going after many members of Alcoholics Anonymous who are using it. We just don't enforce it anymore. Some people really miss it on the first page of the Big Book, right below where it says this is the story of how hundreds or whatever recovered from how the first 100 recovered. I've even seen people who have rubber stamps now who stamp it in their sponsee's Big Book so that the 3 sides of the triangle are there: recovery, unity, and service. And for people that go through the Big Book a certain way, that used to be an important part of explaining to people before they even turn to the preface of the forwards that we have 3 legacies in Alcoholics Anonymous: unity, recovery, and service. But since we stopped using the circle and triangle, only 3rd editions printed before like 1993 still have a circle and triangle in them. Anything after that does not. Let's see, any questions? Do we also hold the copyright to the Spanish Big Book editions and the Spanish translations of the Big Book in Spanish, or just trademark the English names? Nope, they are trademarked because the original Spanish Big Book in the US and Canada simply reprinted all the stories or retranslated. But the new Spanish Big Books that we've had for quite a while have actually stories from Spanish-speaking members. So they required their own copyright because it is an original work. It's not the same as, it's not just a translation of the 4th edition. But yes, those books are copyrighted as well. And for countries that do not have a general service board where we produce the literature for them, then we copyright that in the US. And like I said, for countries that do print their own literature, Germany, Ireland, England, France, there's lots of them. We simply give a license to that board. Any other questions about trademarks and copyrights? I'll give it a second. Okay, 30 seconds, and then we're leaving questions. Okay. We are moving on to one of the more, I don't like to say complicated, but the bylaws of the General Service Board, which are found on page 133 of the Teal Service Manual that I'm in, which is Appendix O for ocean. So there is a note at the top. It says, as Bill W. explains in the article Service Our Third Legacy, see Appendix A, the General Service Board, the trustees, was originally known as the Alcoholic Foundation, with bylaws as broad as the continent. When the corporate name was changed to the General Service Board of AA, new bylaws were needed, which would reflect more clearly the scope and direction of Alcoholics Anonymous. The new bylaws, adopted in 1957, are the work of the late Bernard B. Smith, noted international lawyer, long a non-alcoholic trustee, chair of the board from 1951 to 56. Bern Smith composed the bylaws out of his great love and respect of our fellowship. They contain both the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. They are good reading for all AAs and friends of AA. So a couple of things about that paragraph. Why did the name change? The name changed because of John D. Rockefeller. It's as simple as that. When Bill thought that Rockefeller would give him a lot of money, and Rockefeller delivered bad news. I said this weekend, John D. Rockefeller, he was like the original member of Al-Anon before Al-Anon existed. He apparently had experience dealing with alcoholics. His message to Bill and Bob and the early members were that alcoholics were irresponsible, tended to take other people's money because they could never take care of themselves, tended to just not be responsible for their own life. And John D. Rockefeller said that would be a big mistake for Alcoholics Anonymous, that alcoholics needed to be responsible for their own recovery and for Alcoholics Anonymous. With that was the word foundation. We are not a foundation. So we changed our name from the Alcoholic Foundation to the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, Inc. And that still lives true today. If you look at most other nonprofits, except for other 12-step fellowships that pretty much do things a lot the way we do them. But if they have a couple of $1 million in the bank, they use their investment income to fund current operations. We do not do that. Our reserve fund is there for emergencies. Each year in Alcoholics Anonymous should be self-supporting on its own. That's the way we honor the seventh tradition and Warranty 2. Warranty 2 says that our overall financial policy is sufficient operating expense and an ample reserve. The other thing to know, Bernard Smith, super important. He wrote these. He was also the first chair of the board at the first conference in 1951. He also is responsible for what most people, probably one of the most famous things in the service manual. I would argue the most famous thing that most people know, why we need a conference. That was written by Bernard Smith, a non-alcoholic. And it's still as popular today as the day it was written. You will also notice at the end, it says they contain both the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. No concepts. That's because when Bill wrote this, There were no concepts. When the original bylaws were published, the concepts would not come until 1961. What's in the service manual is the current bylaws of the General Service Board, Inc., meaning that we'll get to it. The concepts are in there now. Now, the bylaws of the General Service Board cannot be changed by the General Service Board. They have to be approved by the General Service Conference. So the trustees can suggest changes, but they have to go on the agenda of the Conference Committee on Trustees. And then the Conference Committee on Trustees needs to make a recommendation to the full conference. And then the conference needs to approve it with a 2/3 vote, or it could be a floor action. But I just want to make that clear, because when we get to the bylaws of AA World Services, Inc. and AA Grapevine, Inc., those boards can make suggestions for changes, but those changes have to be approved by the General Service Board, not the conference. So just very clearly, changes to the General Service Board bylaws have to be approved by the conference. Changes to the AAWS or the AA Grapevine bylaws have to be approved by the General Service Board. Okay. This really gets down into the nitty-gritty, and I'm going to try to pick out the important stuff, but here we go. The General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, Inc. has but one purpose, that of serving the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is in effect an agency created and now designed by the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous to maintain services for those who should be seeking, through Alcoholics Anonymous, the means for arresting the disease of alcoholism through the application to their own lives in whole or in part of the 12 steps which constitute the recovery program upon which the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is founded. These 12 steps are as follows, and then it lists out the steps. But even in that first single paragraph, there's some important. Remember, we are now reading a legal document. This is not like the conference charter. This is the legal bylaws of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it says, to maintain services for those who should be seeking, through Alcoholics Anonymous, the means for arresting the disease of alcoholism through the application to their own lives in whole or in part of the 12 steps which constitute the recovery program upon which the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is founded. So in the legal binding document for the trustees, it tells us that legally we have filed. We want everybody to know that the program of recovery that we have is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then it lists out the 12 steps. And then it says, the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, hereinafter referred to as either the General Service Board or the board, claim no proprietary right in the recovery program for these 12 steps, as all spiritual truths may now be regarded as available to all mankind. However, because these 12 steps have proven to constitute an effective spiritual basis for life, which, if followed, arrests the disease of alcoholism, the General Service Board asserts the negative right of preventing, so far as it may be within its powers to do so, any modification, alteration, or extension of these 12 steps, except at the instance of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, in keeping with the charter of the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous, as the same may be time to time amended. So that's an important paragraph. Because as we know, we have some groups that have changed the steps. I'm not here to say whether that's good or bad. As a private citizen today, I could tell someone, I don't care, you change the steps. Now, if a person changes the steps, that's up to them. But if a group starts printing new steps or hanging new steps on the wall, that is changing the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there have been many discussions at the board level. I was in many, because there's even some conventions now. And again, I am not talking down about those conventions. There's atheist and agnostic conventions and free thinker conventions. The issue becomes if they change the steps, because the trustees have a duty, and Bernard Smith was a genius to make it a legal duty to prevent changing of the steps. It then goes on to say, one of my favorite lines, if anyone knows me, that the members of the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous are hereinafter referred to as conference delegates. So we go back to that the conference is made up of around 135 people. 93 are area delegates. But it says here, members of the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous are referred to as delegates. So that means at the conference, we have area delegates, trustee delegates, director delegates, and staff delegates. Now, in today's kind of AA language, when we say delegate, we kind of mean area delegate. But in relation to the actual conference, this line is super important because it's the great equalizer. That for 7 days a year, the board and the staff and the boards of AAWS and the Grapevine are attending as members of the conference, as delegates. They're not there the week of the conference to act as a trustee or a director or a staff member. Now, they might be asked to provide a report. All three boards give reports at the conference. So the chair of the General Service Board, the chair of AWS, the chair of the Grapevine, the Monday afternoon of the conference give reports. But that doesn't mean they're in a superior position. And at the microphone, when we have debates at the General Service Conference, you have to identify who you are for the archived recording. So you say your full panel number and the area you're from, or you say you're a regional trustee or a non-trustee director on the Grapevine, or you're currently a GSO staff member. But that's just for the recording to keep things straight. Nobody's voice is worth more than anyone else's at the conference. Every voter is equal. It then goes on to say, members of the General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous are hereinafter referred to as conference delegates. It's the General Service Board in its deliberations and decisions shall be guided by the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, hereinafter referred to as the traditions, which are as follows. And then it lists the 12 traditions. It's a strong line. The General Service Board in its deliberations and decisions shall be guided by the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Sometimes people ask me, what's it like to be a trustee or a director on AA World Services? And you vote on a lot of business type stuff. And obviously we need skilled business people to be on those boards for sure. But the difference between being on the AAWS board or the General Service Board and some other nonprofit board, my experience, is on most other nonprofit boards, I can just decide, is this good or bad? Is it going to help our mission? And does it make financial sense? Those are the questions that go through my head right away. Is there a good, in today's world, we love the acronym ROI. Is there a good return on investment, you know? But you see, because this is in the bylaws, when you are a board member on the trustees or on AA World Services or Grapevine, before you even get to the question of, will this be good for our mission, or does this make good financial sense? You have to ask yourself, is what we're about to do, does it fall within the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous? That is the first question for any vote. It's not, are we going to make enough money? It's not, are we going to lose money? It's not, is this going to help us reach 1 million people this year? It's, is what we're going to do, does it fit within the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous? So then it lists the 12 traditions, and then it says the following. The General Service Board shall use its best efforts to ensure that these 12 traditions are maintained, for it is regarded by the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous as the custodian of these traditions. And accordingly, it shall not itself, not so far as to within its power so to do, permit others to modify, alter, or amplify these traditions, except in keeping with the provisions of the Charter. So, same thing with the steps. The board does not have permission to alter, modify, amplify the steps of the traditions. And it says, except for if you do it the way the Charter says to do it, which is a written ballot by all registered AA groups and needing 75% of them to approve. So the conference and the board do not have authority to amplify or change. And then it goes on to say, and this is the part that was not in the original bylaws because they didn't exist. The General Service Board shall also be guided by the spirit of the 12 concepts of Alcoholics Anonymous, hereinafter referred to as the concepts, which in their short form are as follows. So there are the concepts in there. So what's interesting is that Bernard Smith felt originally that the traditions and the concept and the steps were so important that there needed to be a legal obligation on the trustees for them to protect them and to not modify them or amplify them. And instead of just making it a spiritual requirement, he made it a legal requirement. So the next section is titled Trustees. Now, I want to explain a word that gets often confusing. And if you go into the conference, sometimes I'm going to answer this question first. Does the line about changing the steps extend to if other fellowships change the text of the steps so slightly? Must they reproduce it exactly in its entirety if they are using the 12 steps of AA? Well, the bad news on that question is we lost the copyright on the 12 steps. They are no longer copyrighted. The good news on that is that most other fellowships ask for our permission as to what they want their steps to be, because they have such respect and reverence for Alcoholics Anonymous being the original 12-step program. So yes, most of those other fellowships, they've all been approved by AA World Services. Now, the word I wanted to talk about that becomes complicated, and if you are going down the upside down triangle, or if you are just love this stuff to the 100th degree, it's a simple word, the word member, M-E-M-B-E-R. Because we have all kinds of members. We have members of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the ultimate. You can't even be kicked out. We can't even take your ID card away. Like, you can be the worst behaved alcoholic in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you can be kicked out of every single AA group known to mankind, but you're still a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is the ultimate member. But then when it comes to the boards, we have members of the boards, right? But you see, in New York State, and in New York State, they don't use the term nonprofit. Some states do. The law that governs in New York is the Not-for-Profit Act, not for profit. But we are a membership corporation, which means that the members of the corporation own, basically, they're the owners. And so if you're a member of the General Service Board, meaning you're one of the trustees, that's easy. You're also a member of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, Inc., a legal member. But when we get to the bylaws of AAWS and the Grapevine, it becomes a little confusing. Because you could say, who's a member of the AA World Services Board? And if you know your AA Jeopardy, you could raise your hand and you could be like, oh, it's the general manager, the staff coordinator, 4 trustees, and 3 non-trustee directors. They're all members of the AA World Services Board. So in one dictionary definition, that would be a good answer. But it's not the legal answer. All of the people I mentioned, the general manager, the staff coordinator, 4 regional trustees, and 3 non-trustee directors, 4 trustees, 2 regionals, 2 general service trustees, and 3 non-trustee directors, they are all directors on the AA World Services Board. But only the trustees are members of AAWS. See, when you look at a chart that shows AAWS, when you look at a chart that shows the General Service Board, it's simple. Every trustee is a member owner. And every trustee is also a director on the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, Inc. It's very simple. The president, this is like a really good extra credit late night AA trivia question. The president of the General Service Board, Inc. is the chairperson of the General Service Board, not the general manager. Now, when we look at a chart of AAWS, we could have one chart that said, who are the members of AAWS? Who owns this thing? Well, it's the 21 individual trustees, or 22 when we have 22. It's those trustees. They meet once a year after the conference to elect the directors of AA World Services and AA Grapevine. But not all the members are directors. Only 4 of them are for AAWS, the 4 trustees who are on that board, and the same with Grapevine. So as we go through it, I'll try to point out when, the word member is used, but we've switched definitions. So here we go. The membership of the General Service Board shall consist of the trustees. Each trustee shall automatically become a member upon qualifying as a trustee. So when you are elected a trustee, you qualify as a legal member of the General Service Board. And shall automatically cease to be a member upon ceasing to be a trustee of the General Service Board. So when your term is over as a trustee, you have to surrender. If we had a pie chart and said, who owns the whole thing? Who owns the General Service Board? Well, you would divide that pie chart into 21 slices. And when I was a trustee, I owned 1/21st of the General Service Board, 1/21st of AA World Services, and 1/21st of the AA Grapevine. I was a legal member. However, I don't get to take it with me. I don't get to sell it while I'm a trustee. I don't get to put my 1/21st up for auction. Like, I get to be a member when I'm elected a trustee. And when my trustee term is over, I lose my membership, my legal membership. The sole reason for constituting trustee members is in order to comply with the laws of the state of New York, which require a membership corporation to be composed of members. Accordingly, except when distinctions must be made under these bylaws or as a matter of law, the words member and trustee shall be employed in these bylaws collectively. That is easy to do when we're talking about the General Service Board, because there are no non-trustee directors on the General Service Board. The General Service Board is only made up of trustees. So each trustee is a member. It goes on to say, as a condition of election as a member and election as a trustee of the General Service Board, each person shall, before qualifying to serve as a member and trustee, execute an appropriate instrument addressed to the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, stating that each person agrees to comply with and be bound by all the terms and provisions of these bylaws. So that is one of the most important lines in all of the bylaws. Because remember what I said before. I'm a past trustee. I'm a private citizen. If I have a sponsee or a group calls me and asks me, like, Billy, we don't like the third step anymore. And we definitely don't like the 11th. And we want to remove any reference to God or higher power. As a private citizen, I can say whatever I want. I'm not bound by these bylaws anymore. But for 4 years of my life, I did sign the appropriate instrument. And I did agree that I would be bound by the bylaws of the General Service Board. And listen to what it says. Stating that such person agrees to comply with and be bound by all terms and provisions of these bylaws. So when I'm a trustee, I can't tell someone to change the steps. I would not be complying with what I signed and agreed to be bound to. Because I just read you a paragraph where I said that I would not allow any modification, amplification of the steps, the concepts, or the traditions. It then goes on to say, member trustees are divided into two categories, vis-a-vis non-alcoholic and ex-alcoholic. The use of the term entire membership herein refers to the total number of member trustees entitled to vote that the General Service Board would have if there were no vacancies. Except as otherwise provided in these bylaws, the number of member trustees constituting the entire membership shall be 21. Except as otherwise provided in these bylaws, the non-alcoholic member trustees shall be 7 in number and are referred to in these bylaws as Class A member trustees. Except as otherwise provided in these bylaws, the ex-alcoholic member trustees shall be 14 in number and are referred to in these bylaws as Class B member trustees. Now, we're going to read an important paragraph, and it is bad news sometimes for people who want to redefine what you need to be an ultimate member of Alcoholics Anonymous. People think that I just believe in the long form of the traditions. I love the long form of the traditions. Those are the traditions. The short form were just made to fit on a card but you have to be an alcoholic to be an AA member. A desire to stop drinking is not enough. Now, I've been at assemblies where even delegates I've heard say, I don't care that that person never drank. They have a desire to stop drinking. So you're going to find it very interesting what we read tonight. Class A members shall be persons who are not and have not been afflicted by the disease of alcoholism, and who express a profound faith in the recovery program upon which the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is founded. Class A member trustees shall be ineligible to serve for more than 2 successive 3-year terms. So that's what a Class A serves, 2 3-year terms, to be confirmed annually, except that in order to provide the board with a sufficient degree of flexibility, the chair of the General Service Board may recommend to the member trustees that a Class A member trustee be permitted to serve for a third successive 3-year term, and the member trustees acting as members have the authority to permit a Class A member trustee to serve a third consecutive third-year term, if in their judgment such service is the best interest of the fellowship. So I want to say 2 things there. Number one, sometimes I hear people say that Class A trustees are members of AA, that they get to be a member of AA. They do not. In fact, in order to qualify to be a Class A trustee, you can never be afflicted by alcoholism, which is what I read. Where people get that from is this use of the word member. But they're not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. They're a legal member of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. If we need a trustee to serve an extra term, the chair of the board can recommend that to the other trustees, and then they would vote. A Class A member trustee who, at the expiration of the maximum period of time he or she is eligible to serve as a member, namely 3 successive 3-year terms, is serving or newly elected as a chair, shall continue to serve as a Class A member during his or her term as chair, even if such service during his or her term as chair will expand the number of Class A trustee members, then serving to 8. And upon the date that the member trustee ceases to serve as chair, such member trustee shall cease to be a member trustee. So what does that mean? That's a lot of legalese. It means that if you're a Class A trustee and you get elected to become chair, you start a new term for 4 years as chair, and we replace you as a Class A trustee. There will never be more than 7 Class A trustees, including the chair. That's what this is saying, that there always has to be a 2/3 majority of alcoholic Class B. So when the chair is an A, there are only 6 other A's that serve. That's what this whole paragraph is saying. Now, here is the interesting paragraph. I would argue, because I believe that everyone should be able to do service. I believe that every AA member, alcoholic AA member, should be able to do service. And I mean every position that they want to serve. Maybe they don't get elected, but they should have the option to make themselves available. From coffee maker to GSR to anniversary cake person to area treasurer to delegate to trustee. So here's what it says. Except as otherwise provided in these bylaws, there shall be 14 Class B member trustees. These Class B members are designated as ex-alcoholic only because in the common speech of man, an ex-alcoholic is, listen to this definition. It does not sound like a desire to stop drinking. Here's the definition. An ex-alcoholic is an individual who at one time imbibed alcoholic beverages excessively and uncontrollably, but who now does not imbibe at all. So if you tell someone that never drank alcoholically that they just need a desire to stop drinking, are you telling them you can do everything in AA except be a trustee? How fair would that be? No. The bylaws take it so seriously that they really define what being an alcoholic is. Drink excessively and uncontrollably. And then it says, shall be referred to as alcoholic, which means within the terminology of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, those individuals who have arrested their drinking and are living so far as possible within the concepts of the 12 steps which constitute the recovery program. So you have to be an alcoholic who drank excessively and uncontrollably, and your program of recovery has to be the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Those are the requirements to be a Class B trustee. So I am going to stop there at the end of that and take any questions until next week. And next week we will start at the paragraph that says, while in these bylaws we refer to member trustees, we will start there next week. But I will take any questions. I'm aware that there was an announcement at a regional meeting about the financial condition of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm aware that a letter went out today about price increases. I would rather not get into those questions tonight, to be perfectly honest. Those are for your delegate. Any questions on tonight? I know that we're really digging into the details. Okay, given how explicit our bylaws are, why has a PAI, which for anyone that doesn't know that what that is, that's a proposed agenda item. Why has a proposed agenda item code of conduct been put forth for the trustees to follow? Because they're probably going to make it part of the bylaws. They will have the bylaws refer to the code of conduct. And so to do that, the conference would have to approve the code of conduct to later make it a bylaw, to put it in the bylaws. Where are the previous Monday recordings located? They are located on YouTube. If you search Monday Night Service Workshop, they're also in a private group on Facebook. I will put my text and WhatsApp number here and my email if you would like to get in that private group, or if you need that YouTube, just let me know. Any other questions? I'll give it a minute because I know we're really in the details, but I love the new service manual. On one hand, I love it. It's awesome. It has all these exhibits, but it's now so big that it's too expensive to mail. When you used to become a GSR, you got a service manual in the mail. It was part of what you was sent in your GSR kit. But the service manual now is like your car owner guide. Like it's like the old Sears Christmas catalog. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I love that it has all this information, but I wish that GSR has still got sent that book, but I understand how expensive it is because it weighs so much more now. Any questions? Okay. We will close in the usual manner. Like I said, I wish everyone a Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas or any other holiday. We will be here next week. My usual reminder, this is a good time of year that you can drop the service manual a couple of days a week. There's a lot of people dying of alcoholism right now. This is a tough time of year. There's a lot of people counting days. This is a tough time of year to count days between family parties, holiday parties, work parties, God knows what else. So we know what's most important, to be fair, for the newcomer coming in the door. So with that, I will close with the responsibility statement. I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. For the person who asked the question about having trouble, I'll make sure that next week we put a copy and paste of the YouTube drive inside the chat. I'll make sure the most current one is there. The good thing about that drive is it updates every time something is added to it. So that's it. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.